Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and it's an honor and privilege to introduce you to Meg Wilson, the author of Hope After Betrayal, Healing When Sexual Addiction Invades Your Marriage. She's a regular speaker to women's groups, Bible studies, and conferences. 18 years ago, she began leading healing heart groups. Then in 2013, she founded the Hope After Betrayal Ministries to help bring help and hope to women whose husbands are caught in the web of sexual addiction. Her mission is to help women find hope and healing from the pain of their partner's sexual betrayal. In addition, she hopes to increase awareness in the church of how to minister to the brokenhearted. She and her husband Dave have been married for more than 35 years and have two adult daughters. The Wilsons make their home in Vancouver, Washington. You can learn about Meg at hopeafterbetrayal.com. You can follow her on Facebook at HAB Ministries and on Twitter at Hope After Betray. Meg Wilson, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, Eric.
I am so moved and touched and honored to have you on the program, having been on the betrayed side, knowing of a hopelessness before I went to counseling to find hope again. I struggled with hopelessness after betrayal that wound up ending in divorce. Your situation is much different because you fought and scraped and scrapped and held on with everything you possibly could because of your foundation of faith. And so I want to explore the foundation that you were standing in, how firmly implanted your feet were, almost in the concrete of faith that you held on to survive and then thrive in this situation. So let's go back to little Meg. Long before Megan Wilson, the ministry leader and the founder of ministry and the helper to so many, what were the influences in your life? Who were the real people that touched your life?
You know, that's an easy question, because one of the biggest influencers in my life was my sister. We did not grow up in a Christian home, and she accepted Christ in high school. And I remember my big sister, inviting her little pesky junior high sister to a meeting at one of the coach's house. Turns out that was a Young Life meeting. And that was the first time I had ever heard people talking about God in a relational way. And it just sort of, I remember sort of a beginning, an opening, my eyes being opened. Nothing dramatic happened, but God was definitely pursuing me. And my dad was in the Air Force. We moved to England. So we were on a base in England, and there was a base chaplain that had a heart for the youth. And so we had a very active youth group, and I accepted Christ there and was baptized in a little tiny church. And but what's interesting is my mom was not real happy about that. I jokingly say that in our family, rebellion was becoming a Christian. So that's kind of where that started. And then I moved on and went to college. My sister also introduced me to Dave. And so she was obviously impactful there. The funny thing is, well, not funny, I had kind of stepped away from my faith. I didn't have any support and thought that was just a phase, and went on to college to conquer corporate America or whatever I was going to do. Met and married Dave. But then once I had my daughter, I began realizing that I really wanted to have that faith piece back in my life. God also planted me in my first job with 5 other believers. And that was not that was not by accident. And they started asking questions, and I was like, well, I went through that phase, but it wasn't long that I felt that stirring again, and God was just calling me back. And so I recommitted, and my husband was skeptical, but he said, you do what you want. And I thought, okay, I'll do what I want and I'll just pray for you. And so it wasn't long. By the time my daughter was 2, we had found a church. I'd convinced him to come, and I would say within the first few months, he accepted Christ. So that's when our journey began together.
So as you began to walk out this new faith relationship, how did the marriage dynamic change?
Well, I think in the beginning, I think he was watching and seeing that I was gaining some peace and some understanding, and I was seeking biblical understanding in terms of parenting, because I realized I didn't have really many tools as a parent. I didn't want to have the same kind of relationship that I had with my parents. They were pretty much absentee parents. And so I think that was part of it. And then just the Holy Spirit is a pursuer. And I think that because of his hidden secret life, this probably felt like a potential way of getting free. Now, I didn't know that, but for him, I'm pretty sure that's what he would say, is he thought this was going to be the magic bullet, because as most people who are ensnared by addiction, they want out. They're doing the very thing they don't want to do. And so I think he probably hoped that that would be the case. But he got immersed into church politics. They thought, oh, here's a successful businessman. He should be on the church board. And soon he was a moderator. And I'm not sure. There wasn't quality discipleship. There weren't men that came alongside him and said, hey, what are you doing? How's your thought life? Unfortunately. And so he did what many addicts do. When there's this dark corner of your life, you try to make all the other areas of your life as clean and shiny as possible. And so that's the side of my husband I saw. He was honest, and he was attentive, and he was a good father. And contrary to what people might think, sex was not a problem. So, yeah.
At what point for Dave did he or did you have any suspicions, or was there any evidence, or how did all of this get uncovered? And we're talking about pornography. We're not talking about him having an adulterous relationship with another human being outside of the marriage.
Right.
Although it is tantamount to, it's the same but different. It's an infidelity.
Right.
So where did you start seeing? What did you see versus what Dave projected?
Well, in hindsight, he was very disconnected from emotions. He was not an emotional person. But that's kind of the family background I came out of. We had very similar backgrounds. His father was military. My father's military. His father struggled with alcoholism. That was in the background of our family as well. So it's not a surprise that we found each other. We were, kind of bent in the same direction. But I'm sorry. I think I lost track of your question.
Well, it's really, you were kind of broken together.
Right.
There's a song out there called "Broken Together." Can't we just be broken together?
Right.
But healed at the broken places is different than staying broken together.
Right.
It's kind of a different attitude, a different approach. So
right. You were asking if there were signs.
Yes.
And there was one time when we got the internet that I found something, and we immediately disconnected the internet. So for me, it came pretty much out of the blue. The way it happened, a friend of ours called. They lived in California with us, and they had moved away, and he called and he said, I just want to let you guys know I'm stepping down as a deacon of our church because I'm addicted to pornography. That was the first I had ever heard of that. And I thought, wow, this makes no sense. He's a nice good church guy. He's a great dad, a great husband. So I didn't, but because of that, my husband realized, oh my gosh, I think that's what I have. So that's when he gave a partial confession. He told me just what he thought I could handle, which is not uncommon and is a huge mistake that many addicts make.
So kind of give me a little bit of that narrative, a little bit of that dialogue. You're sitting down at dinner, and he says to you, listen, my friend is stepping down, and, I think I might have a little bit of that myself.
Right, right. It took him probably a month after that call to say, I just need you to know I'm struggling with this when I travel, and I'm struggling with pornography, but I did what so many Christian women do. I just thought, oh, praise God, he's telling me it's only pornography, and I just put a high gloss finish on it and thought, great, he's going to get help and we're going to be good. And so I was probably a little ignorant in that.
Well, at some point, something caused you to go deeper and realize that this was much deeper than this superficial, I toy with it when I'm on the road kind of thing.
Right.
What precipitated that?
Well, after he confessed, we literally moved here to Washington, and we ended up in a church that had a group for men dealing with sexual addiction, and for men only group, FMO. And so he was involved in that, and he had a counselor, and I went with a friend of mine to the leadership of our church and said, hey, you have this group for the men, why not the wives? And they said, oh, that's great. Why don't you go over to this other church that was 45 minutes away, go through their program and bring it here? And we thought, great, we'll do that. That was what I didn't know, is that God was building supports for what was going to come. So fast forward, now my friend and I are starting our own, we called them Healing Hope groups, and we had 10 ladies, and it's the night before I'm going to share my testimony of hope, and my husband had been on a business trip the week before, home on the weekend, and gone again, and he had called his leader to tell him that he had fallen. He had actually gone outside of the marriage and been with someone else. And he said, you've got to get home now. Your wife's about to share her testimony, because his wife was my co-leader. And he said, you've got to come home now, and you've got to share this with her. And so literally there was a message on the phone that said, I'm coming home. Make sure the girls are not home. I have to tell you something about his boss being supportive. So I knew he hadn't lost his job. And then I just waited just for that, knowing that there was about to be a huge explosion go off.
So what happened? What did he share with you, and how did you respond to it?
Well, he walked in the door, and he had a rolled up journal. I could see by the look on his face that he was carrying a heavy, heavy load. And he just sat down and began to go through a timeline that this started when he was 10 years old, when he found his father's pornography, and the progression of, sporadic use of pornography, and then it escalated with the internet, and then after he shared to the point where his first confession was, and the parts that he left out, and but then he had to share now, because it left a foothold when you leave something out. And so the enemy took him way farther than he ever thought he would go, because now he's a manager, and now he doesn't share a room when he travels. And so it went much farther, and so he had to confess that. And so I remember being in shock. I was looking down at my legs because they were shaking, and I was thinking, oh wow, my legs are shaking. I mean, it was very strange, surreal. It's as close to if the injury were physical, it would be as close to death as you can be emotionally. That's how I felt. I just couldn't absorb it. I remember saying to him, I don't know what I'm going to do. I knew enough to know not to make a decision without hearing from God. I was pretty sure, though, that God was going to give me the out. I was really, that's what my flesh wanted, was just for the pain to stop. And I thought just leaving would be the answer. And so it took 3 days for him to go through everything to make sure that he had told me everything. And all during those 3 days, we were so much crying and crying out to God, why? And, reminding him I quit my job to stay home and I'd been a faithful wife and, like God forgot all the things. Or even as if God owed me something, which of course he didn't. And then that third day when Dave shared probably for him some of the most shameful things, for me it was just more of the same. I remember that was it was an incredible moment. I remember seeing my husband, feeling like I was in a hand, a large hand, being held close to the Lord. My husband was in his other hand, but he was being held out. Later, I found the scripture about being in God's righteous right hand. And I'm a lefty, and I visualized I was in God's right hand. Dave was in his left. And I remember as he was looking down at him, I didn't see the activity. I didn't see the things that he did. I saw a little boy. I saw 30 years of pain on him. And I just put my arm on his shoulder, and he just broke, because I remember God didn't have to answer my why. But in that moment, I felt him say, if you don't extend my grace to him, he may never know it. And so I had a decision in that moment. It wasn't my fault. These were his choices. But now I had to decide, how am I going to respond? I'm going to offer grace. And literally, if there were chains in the room, they would have dropped at that moment. Not that everything was hunky-dory and all healed, but finally healing, the light of God's healing could begin to shine in this place.
What's interesting is you're describing what is so necessary in real healing, and that is to rip the wound open, to get past the surface, because we see a wound healed on the outside, but in this pocket that exists in there, it's a festering pocket of infection. And until we get to the root, until we get to all the way down to what we would call medically clean margins of healing, of good tissue, of good flesh, then we can begin the process of slowly letting it heal where it's completely bound together. And what you did was you were really his counselor. He had really opened up to you, going back to 10 years old, that this was not a 40-year-old man talking to you. It was a 10-year-old child who had just been exposed to something that he didn't understand, and he dabbled in, and it lived with him and took on its own life within him. He did step outside of the marriage.
Yeah.
How were you able to, or did you separate the two, or did you see them all as just one major transgression that was deeply rooted in a childhood issue that needed to be dealt with at the childhood healing level?
Yeah, it's pretty much one issue. And having walked now with hundreds of women, the devastation on the wife of a husband who's addicted to pornography is the same devastated look as a wife whose husband has been in multiple affairs. I mean, the betrayal at the core of your being for a woman, it goes deep, because our sexuality, that's the most intimate place. And so yeah, I think there are times when you think, oh, you want to put a measure on it. Well, it's only, does it matter if it's a tablespoon of poison or a cup of poison? Not really. So, yeah.
You found in this journey that there's great power in transparency.
Yes.
That there is also a time, and it's not always the time of being caught. It's not always the time of crisis. The transparency becomes its most powerful. How do we know when the right time is, and how do we encourage people to become transparent no matter what their greatest fear is? And the greatest fear is rejection. But on the other side of this, the worst feeling we can have is betrayal.
Right.
So it's almost an exchange of my worst fear is being realized by your worst fear. Our fears have to meet together for us to become victorious. How do you navigate that? When is the right time, and how do you do that where it can save and salvage? I know it takes a very special heart.
Well, that's
because most of these end in divorce.
Yeah, that's a big question, Eric. It's I think one of the most powerful tools the enemy has is shame. And so there's obviously shame from the behavior. The wife takes on that shame. There's risk. It's risky to be transparent. So what you see with my husband and I is obedience. We've been called to be transparent. Not everybody who walks this walk is called to be as transparent, and it comes at a cost. I'll be honest. You know, I'm always checking in with my family, and yeah, it comes at a cost. I know that I'm sure there's been lots of fodder, gossip, whatever. This is too good not to, but early on in this process, I really felt like God said, I want you to give me your reputation. I had to lay my reputation on the altar. And then I go only where I feel God calling me to go. Because there's only one time I stepped out, shared something with someone in my gut. I sensed, probably not a good idea, not a safe person, and it didn't go well. So I'd say transparency in and of itself can be risky, but if it's out of obedience and you're going where God's called you to go, then you let the chips fall where they may. And we had so many conversations around the book coming out, and could my husband lose his job, and I don't give a lot of details about where my husband goes because we didn't want to feed the voyeurs, number one, and number two, I want every woman who reads that book to put her own details in there. There's enough for her to know that I understand the pain.
Right.
So there's definitely a balance of having protective boundaries, but also being willing to go where God's calling us to go.
Meg, before we go to break, I want to ask you this question. In hindsight, when you look back over your relationship with Dave, was there a time when you felt suspicion that there's something hidden, that you just didn't know what it was, and you didn't give him 100% trust, that there was something intuitively, or there was some other area that was an indication that maybe there was something hidden, or were you just rocking along with this as if everything was just fine?
Yeah, for me, it was completely a sucker punch. It was completely out of the blue. In knowing now what I know, there were maybe indicators, his personality and that sort of thing. And there are many women who come in and they had a sense. So I would say to a woman, if you think, you should trust your gut. We have a really good gut. That's where the Holy Spirit works often. And so I think that is often the case. For me, sadly, I really was very trusting of my husband.
Well, I want to give you a great deal of encouragement from Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, where Joseph calls together his brothers and says, look, what you meant for evil, God worked for his good so that many would be saved. Mm-hmm. If there wasn't a Meg Wilson who have traversed and walked this walk and then been transparent about this, people would be suffering in silence. There'd be more divorces. There would be more people struggling with how to deal with betrayal. Could they find it? Can they find it in their own hearts to find the grace and the mercy and the forgiveness? Can they be reminded that they too have been forgiven of many things that are not beautiful and wonderful to the Lord, and people who can't forgive have forgotten what they have been forgiven of? But then there are those that continue to transgress. And when we come back from break, I'm going to ask you, were there transgressions after transparency, Or was this what brought about the road to real reconciliation and real healing that brings us to today, where we're able to put it out in print and even have Dave write a chapter of the book and tell his story? And are we there? We're going to take a short break. We're talking with Meg Wilson, author of Hope After Betrayal, Healing When Sexual Addiction Invades Your Marriage. An extraordinary trip down the lane of betrayal, not just in regards to sexual addiction, but betrayal in all regards of how you can handle and navigate this betrayal that many of us have had to live through. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with Meg Wilson, author of the newly released book, Hope After Betrayal, Healing When Sexual Addiction Invades Your Marriage. Meg, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
Meg, when we went to break, I kind of set it up for the question I was going to ask you was there transgression after transparency? And if there was transgression after transparency, how did you handle it? Or did transparency bring about a path to healing that allowed this wound, going back to a 10-year-old, to be opened and healed slowly for both of you? Because both of you had to go back to that place together. Both of you had to have a wound opened that was very, very deep. All right?
Right.
So was there transgression after transparency?
Yes, there was. You can't turn a Titanic around overnight. And when you've got something that started at such an early age, it's not going to instantly. I guess there are some that have been released instantly. I shouldn't say that. God can do what he wants to do. But for my husband, there was a lot of deep work that was yet to do. Like you said, we had to continually scrape that wound to make sure the margins were clean. And so he had a counselor, I had a counselor. We set up a spiritual care team based on a book by Earl and Sandy Wilson called Restoring the Fallen. And so we basically reached out for any and all resources. And in the beginning, there was a separation, not a physical separation in the sense that I kicked him out, because I was very conscious of not wanting to devastate my girls more than once. So it was kind of like, in the beginning, we slept in the same room, but we were pretty much like roommates. Like he couldn't be in there when I was dressing, that kind of thing. It was very much a separation, because I liken it to, we both had been in a near fatal car crash. Right. He had to go deal with his brain injury, and I had to work on my internal injuries. Two very different processes, couldn't help each other in the beginning. So he's doing his work, I'm doing my work, trying to figure out, okay, what, Lord, do you have for me in this? And frankly, in my quiet time, I was thinking, okay, Lord, do I have biblical grounds here? What are your thoughts? And I felt like God said, Meg, I'm not asking you to do this over and over again, but I am asking you to wait. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to wait. But if I were honest, I was poised and ready to run, waiting for that next shoe to drop. So there's a difference between what I would call a slip, as opposed to someone going fully back to where they were. Had my husband gone outside of our marriage again, I'm pretty sure that I would have been released at that point. Because it's important to note, I feel like it's important to note that divorce has already occurred in the heavenly realms. The covenant is already broken. So everyone who goes through has been through a divorce. The pain is equal to that. The question is, can there be reconciliation? Can this be knit back together? And the only time, and that takes two people working very hard to have that happen. So I was watching to see if my husband was serious about his healing journey. And so he had accountability and that sort of thing. And I tell women now, we look for progress, not perfection. So if there was a slip, if my husband masturbated, for example, then if he told me right away, that was a sign that there was growth. That was a sign that he was keeping everything out in the open. So as hard as those things were, I would always look for, okay, what did you learn from this? What are you going to change? How are you going to shore things up to protect yourself from the next time? So that was the process. So it's looking for progress. And then about 10 months out, I felt God saying, it was going to be our 20th wedding anniversary. And I felt God say, I want you to put that toe back in, Meg. I want you to recommit to your marriage. And I really wrestled. I'm like, I don't know about this, Lord. I don't feel the old vows. So what do you want me to say? And so I just got to that place where I felt like he said, why don't you commit to me in your husband? And so that's what I did. At 20 years, I said, I will trust Christ in my husband. And when I see God at work in my husband, I will trust that. And when he traveled, I would get fearful because I realized that I could never be everywhere my husband is. And so fear would grip me when he was gone. And God had to just say, Meg, you'll never be everywhere he is, but I am. So this isn't about trusting your husband. This is about trusting me. Mm-hmm. And so just that gradual process of, I really feel like God was taking all of these cords that I had attached to my husband, cords of security, self-worth, identity, and he was surgically removing those and saying, those really need to be attached to me. And so that was the process that was happening for me the same time my husband was doing his own healing work.
Meg, your book is entitled Hope After Betrayal. And hope is in all caps. Hope mm-hmm. is the emphasis. Mm-hmm. Hope is the message. And there are responsibilities that you identify that a wife has in her husband's recovery. Mm-hmm. Traveling the rocky road of probative questions, traveling the rocky road of accountability, traveling the rocky road of a broken trust. Can it be repaired? And I often equate this to metal. When it's broken and it's welded together, if it's welded together properly, it will never break at that point again. It'll break outside that point. I performed a wedding ceremony a couple of months ago, and I talked about the cord of 3 strands is not easily broken. I said, but after 50 years, it's no longer silver and gold and beautiful. It's duct tape. It's all duct tape. It's just this long length of duct tape where we've patched together all the frayed edges. But it requires constant maintenance and constant repairs and constant fixing in order to remain a cord of 3 strands that is not easily broken. It has to be reinforced. So when you began to redefine your role, and there was a redefinition of your role as wife, as mother, as lover, as spouse, how did you reshape that, and what biblical model did you use to do that?
Well, I think that for me, it was just diving into the relationship with God and leaning in to hear his voice before I made decisions. That verse about the sheep know the shepherd's voice. And I needed to know that he was in it, that he was for us. There were so many lessons along the way. I remember making a joke. I was in a group of women because I was facilitating groups, and I made a joke about wishing I had married a sinner like me, and we all laughed. And that later, I felt the Holy Spirit tap me on the shoulder and say, remember that joke that you made, Meg? I want to give you a different perspective. I want you to come up here with me. And I want you to see from my vantage point, because those pretty little sins that you have that are socially acceptable or, seemingly small, those sins take the same blood of my son as your husband's. And that was the end of that. It completely changed my heart in regards to that. It just leveled the playing field. So just that reality of, we're all sinners saved by grace. And I'd spent a lot of time reading the word and studying the word. And then there's I had a lot of head knowledge, and I remember this process. It felt like it took all that head knowledge and it went down into my heart. I remember at one point thinking, after a sweet time with the Lord, oh, now I know how people could be martyred for Christ. Now I get it. Because no one could take away what God has done in caring for me and carrying me through this process. Nobody could ever take that away from me. So yeah, it's been a journey of relationship.
As you come to the apex of this journey where you're able to write the book, you're able to tell the story and go public in the community that you're in, and then go public at large and launch a ministry and say that part of our ongoing healing is that like of and I actually I'm not the biggest fan of people constantly saying I'm a recovering alcoholic or I'm a recovering addict or I'm a recovering this. It kind of affirms the addiction. So I have a hard time in claiming that I have not been released, I have not been healed, I have not been delivered, that God's power is only to the point of taking me up to acknowledging that I'm an ongoing sinner. Well, that's clearly established. Do we look at Dave as a recovering addict, or do we look at Dave as a healed and whole and growing in the Lord and perfecting his walk and realizing that all of our walk needs dusting and cleaning and perfection on a daily basis? This is why he said, when you pray, pray this way, give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses. So we do live this life of faith one day at a time, but should we be defining ourselves as recovering sexual addicts or recovering betrayers or recovering betrayed? I don't want to be defined as, oh yeah, he's the rabbi that's the recovering from betrayal.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. My husband would absolutely agree with you. He says, that's who I once was. That's who I once was. That's not who he is anymore. He certainly isn't defined by that. And I ask him all the time, are you still okay with this ministry? Are you still, the farther away we get from that point, it's like, do we still want to come back to that? And again, for us, it's about obedience. I think there will be a time when we'll be released to just, play with our grandkids and maybe occasionally speak on the topic. But, God gets to decide all of that. And the sad thing is that the world doesn't treat sexual sin well. There's so much shame. And the reality is we are all broken and we are all sexually broken. It just looks different. And as soon as you put shame, because shame motivates people to hide. So as soon as people are in hiding, what happens? They're out of the sunlight that can actually heal them. So, I get frustrated sometimes. I'm in this world. I'm talking with people that get it. I see women all the time. I go into a church and I know that 50% or more of the people are wrestling with this addiction. Men and women are wrestling with this. About 30% of women, and that number's growing. So there are men who've been betrayed. This is, I focus on the women just because that's what I know. But I also, so I go in and I think, man, if we could just create a culture where it was okay to bring our brokenness into the light and where we wouldn't be slammed or had a label put on us that's going to last a lifetime, like you're forever. I was talking to one of the gals who's been through our group. Her husband is a registered sex offender, and the stuff that they have to go through, he's well beyond 5 years. He was a level 1, but he's slapped with this label forever. He can't travel. So on one side, I understand we want to protect children, we want to protect, but with our zeal to protect the innocent, we so damage those that have been caught but really want to heal. And I know those are in the minority. I know how hard it is for a man to make the decision to let God turn him inside out and, reconnect all of his arteries to his heart. I mean, it's a very slow, hard process. So I do understand, but I wish we had more grace for those that were truly embracing God's change. So it's a tough issue.
As we look out there, there's something that's really quite obvious in the Bible, and that is where there is Baal, there is sexual sin. Where there is a religious spirit, there is sexual sin. When there is this heavy religiosity, and if you take a look at the leaders who have fallen, great leaders, they had, there was a great deal of religious heavy-handedness. When we take a look at these situations within the Catholic Church, just the latest revelation out of Pennsylvania, the heavier the religious spirit, the more the sexual sin. We learn that in the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel when Elijah defeated them. After everyone declared the Lord he is God, they all went down the mountain mated with women. There's this connection to a religious spirit that brings about, and it's because a religious spirit has a foundation in shame. It has a foundation in guilt. It has a foundation in, I'm so reminded over and over again that I am a sinner, I am a sinner, I'm 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 a sinner, that there's nothing that I can do to not be a sinner, so I might as well go out and sin because I'm going to receive the condemnation for it. It says in the Bible, with God there is no condemnation. And therefore, we should have the freedoms. Yes, there are temptations. And yes, Satan is the great divider and the great deceiver. And what might appear to be innocent is not innocent, especially when there's a family. And you have daughters, and you have to explain this to your daughters, that this is about your father and myself. I can't hide this book from you. I can't hide this ministry from you. But we are also called to discern the spirits. And I want to go back to your statement that said to women, if you have a gut check, okay, if your spirit is telling you that there's something being covered up, there's something that is working in you that's saying that there's just something not right, there's something a little bit off. How do they go about? What is your advice to them? How do they go about helping to uncover that in a safe, not in an unsafe, not an accusatory, not in a disruptive, but a safe way to approach so that other people can get to where you and Dave are? You are the poster child now for how do you recover from this sexual betrayal. Okay, others can get there too. You counsel a lot of other people, but when you have that gut check, what should people be saying? What should they be asking?
Yeah, I think the first thing you do is you pray about it. You say, okay, Lord, bring out that which is hidden. That is a prayer that I say all the time. I say over our leaders. I say it over our, over the people that we're under. It's like, Lord, if there's hidden things, bring it out in the open. And then there's a difference. It's important to note there's a difference between a gentle nudge where God says, I want you to take a look at something, versus a voracious, I have to know kind of a thing. Because sometimes when you feel like there's been betrayal, women can get into this detective mode, and then it's this, it can't be satisfied. That feels very different. That's not healthy. And then if your husband is angry, if there could be any idea that it could be unsafe to approach him, then you get a leader of the church, you get a man to help you approach him. You don't do that by yourself, because safety is essential. And if you're poking the bear, and you need to get some help with that. So I think that, yeah, it's the Spirit really has to lead that process.
Well, I think that's very, very sound counsel, and applies to a number of people that I know, that there was just no safe way, that they did feel threatened and that they did feel unsafe, but they did become detectives, and
Yeah.
they did become GPS and camera watchers, and when you get yourself to that point, you're either in denial that there's a problem, or you're in the investigative mode that says, I'm going to find out what the problem is. But neither one of those approaches brings any ability for reconciliation. And that's really the heart of your book, Hope After Betrayal, that you can get to a point of transparency, but both parties have to be willing, and they have to be willing to submit and surrender to God and to godly counsel and godly accountability. And you can't be Academy Award-winning actor and put on a show and have the right words to say, because people are going to see through it, and that's going to be even more destructive, because that trust, once broken, can never be restored again. And so I thank you, Meg Wilson, for sharing Hope After Betrayal, Healing When Sexual Sin Invades Your Marriage. Thank you to Dave, incredibly proud of the man that he is. He is an encouragement to so many others, and I want this book to be a book that any of you who have been through betrayal, think you're being betrayed, or you are on the other side of this and you're caught up in something that it could be explosive in your marriage. It also helps you navigate how you can have the same conversations that Meg and Dave had, and how some good can come of it. There are resources available to you. You can visit Meg's ministry at hopeafterbetrayal.com. There's great resources there, and she is available to help you as well. Meg Wilson, thank you so much for sharing this story. Poignant, important story that the church is not talking about, here with us on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you.
God bless you, my friend.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.